Yulma, welcome to Floriade Reimagined. I'm Dan Bourchier, and it's great to have you here as part of Let's Talk. We are in these very unusual times, but to begin, I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the not all people, those that have maintained culture, storylines and songlines for time immemorial, and have also managed the land that we're on. And so much of the discussions around Floriade Reimagined are going to be just that, about land, about how we look after it, about sustainability, and perhaps how we're a bit better in sync. So I'm very glad that you're here and joining us, be it in person with a very small group here under all of the COVID-19 restrictions, or watching from your home, wherever you are around Australia and around the world as we all grapple with these unusual new times. But it is certainly very good to have you along. Today, we're going to be talking about food, and one of my favourite topics, desserts and very sweet foods indeed. Anthea Cheng is here with her new book, Incredible Plant-Based Desserts. And we're going to be talking about that, about some of the influences that have factored into how she's come to be, the use of social media, and how that's had an impact as well. And we're also going to be talking about, I'm hoping, some of the tricks of the trade, what goes on behind the scenes as well. Now, I mentioned that we're in these COVID-19 times, and in the face of what has been a very, very challenging year and still continues to be for many, many parts as we all grapple with the changing circumstances, we are really thrilled to be able to have very small events where we operate with very strict guidelines around social distancing, physical distancing, making sure that hand hygiene is key as well, and also that we're COVID safe, because that's all of our responsibilities as a time like this while we are grappling this pandemic. And of course, we wouldn't be able to have events like this without some significant sponsors. And I'd like to pay my respects and thanks to the ACT Government, the National Capital Authority, Canberra Centre and National Circuit for bringing this event and making it, well, so that we can all participate in it for free as well. Anthea Cheng, a chef, food photographer, food stylist, star of social media, and also one of those people that is reframing the discussion about food, about what we eat, about how we eat it, and how we create it for ourselves, whether it's through vegan desserts that I'm very intrigued to get to discussing on very soon, through to the boutique cakes, gluten-free, refined sugar, you name it, and Anthea Cheng has touched on it. And you can find out plenty more about this at www.rainbownourishments.com, which is Anthea's website. It's on Instagram as well, and all of your favourite social media platforms. Anthea Cheng, Yulma, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me and for your very generous introduction. To be honest, I'm at home most of the time just working for myself, so I find it kind of strange and humbling when people talk about me in such a manner, so thank you.
Well, I tell you what, I was moved by the book. I'm a sweet tooth, I'm not going to lie. Where did it start from for you?
Oh, okay. Loaded question. So my parents owned restaurants throughout my whole entire life. I'm actually originally from Sydney. So I haven't known otherwise, but I had a very normal upbringing. Like, I went to school, went to uni. I was set on a very different career path. So I was working in Indigenous affairs in government for about 5 years. Then I realised that it wasn't my thing. But at the same time, I had a food blog in my last year of working in government. So I found out that was my real passion. I was always really passionate about food because I grew up in that kind of environment. But
you wanted to move away from that, didn't you? You didn't want to follow the pathway of your parents after they immigrated to Australia from Hong Kong in the 1970s. Even though they came from banking, administration, nursing, they found themselves in what I think we would dub now a fusion restaurant. In fact, they, at that time,
to say that
they were probably at the very first wave of bringing those Asian influences, combining that with Australian staples as well.
Yes, you're completely right. So growing up, my parents, although they're all about food and study, so I could only ever study or cook. So it was one or the other. There was nothing in between. We're always like, we're working so hard to bring you the best opportunities that you can, and do not work in hospitality. But I think they secretly wanted me to own the family restaurant at the end. So it was this conflicting message. So I'm like, okay. I agree, I don't want to work in hospitality, because they worked their butts off every single day, and they would bring their business to the family dinner table, and there was not one day where we wouldn't see their hardship coming from another country to Australia. Like, I couldn't imagine migrating to a country where I couldn't speak the main language. So it was particularly difficult for them. So it was definitely not something I wanted to do, and I knew that the money in hospitality wasn't amazing for how much effort you would put in. So I worked my ass off and to forge a different career path for me, and I did quite well with it, considering the circumstances. But food was still my second language, or my first language actually. I probably started cooking before I could speak. So yeah, so it felt so natural for me.
I want to stick with the food thing, but we'll just take a slight tangent,
Yes.
because it was politics, it was humanitarian issues. You mentioned Indigenous affairs. Why that pathway?
I studied and researched with Indigenous people and issues in uni. It was one of those subjects that I kept reading about and really stuck with me. It's something to do with being a marginalised group in Australia, and I had this fascination with memory and intergenerational issues and trauma that is quite personal to me. So for that reason, it was something that I wanted to explore more, and I'm still very passionate about it, but it just doesn't... Would love to combine it with my job at Rainbow Nourishments, but I'm still trying to find a way to do that. I guess because Rainbow Nourishments is about vegan food, so I do kind of explore marginalised groups in some way, but it's not exactly what I used to do.
How much is food a pathway to having those conversations, to perhaps finding different solutions, having different conversations?
Yeah. I think it's great. Like, I'm not the typical vegan who wears only black clothes and stands on the streets and asks people why they're eating meat and stuff like that. I'm probably the last person to do that, and probably run away from doing that, because I'm not the strongest advocate for... I'm not the strongest activist for being able to speak about that. So I think food is a much gentler way to prove that vegan food and the lifestyle is worthwhile.
Why vegan? Why is it worthwhile?
So my vegan story started when I was 14, which is quite some time ago, which probably reveals my age. I had a group of friends who were very kind of environmental based, so I realised that eating less meat and less animal products would reduce my impact on the environment. I didn't grow up with animals because I have really bad allergies and kind of sneeze at any time I see a cat or dog, so I didn't really relate to that side of veganism initially. So I went plant-based when I was about 14 and cut out all animal products. It wasn't really sustainable because I grew up in an environment where it was very meat-focused. So I couldn't keep that up. But once I turned 20-something, I realised how much easier it was. And veganism has changed so much in the last 20 years. Initially, it was all about soy milk, and now you can have everything else. So I don't know if I answered your question actually. Why? It's probably... Okay, so initially, environmental and health reasons. Also, my family genetically has really high cholesterol. So I know that most animal products have... By cutting out animal products, that would really reduce my cholesterol, which really did help. Then yeah, it just kind of carried on. But then once it became plant-based, I realised all the animal anti-cruelty reasons for not wearing wool and leather and stuff like that. So,
and you touched on there that the conversation used to be about soy milk or nothing.
Yeah.
How much more sophisticated is our understanding of veganism, is the conversation, or even the ability to get things to eat, to consume?
It's been amazing. So when I first went plant-based, all I could do was have soy milk and eat kind of chickpeas and tofu if I was lucky, and everything else was just not really accessible for someone who was 15 and someone who didn't really earn money at that age. So, but now there's ice cream, there's cakes, there's like, you won't be able to miss out on anything.
What role have you had in that change? You've got a book that came out a couple of years ago. You're huge on social media. You've got a blog, a website, a real following. How much are you leading the charge?
Oh, I don't know. Like, I would like to think that I've influenced some people to realise that vegan cakes can be delicious, or cakes can be delicious without animal products. I don't know what impact I've had at large. Like, I do have a big social media following. I don't know, I try to keep quite humble about it. So I know that a lot of people have come to me and just like, your blog is the reason why I've gone vegan, and that makes a big difference. I try to not focus on maybe this isn't a good way for food bloggers, but not focus on the big picture, but the smaller picture, because that was a real mind shift. Yeah, that was a real mind shift away from when I used to work in government, and just focus on having small conversations. Not all vegans are the same in terms of personality and stuff. So I think just offering something else to veganism, that, you know, vegans can be professionals, they can be ethnic, they don't have to be strong activists who kind of are in your face, and vegan food can be delicious, and it can happen to be vegan. So accidentally vegan stuff is what I'm aiming for. If that makes sense. Yeah.
The point I think you're making is focusing on the plate rather than the pasture.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk desserts.
Sure.
Why desserts?
Why desserts? Okay, so I have a real sweet tooth, even though I don't like to admit it. Like, after I wrote the book, I'm just like, oh my goodness, I would not be able to eat a dessert for like years. But I realized that even like when I travel, I'm just like, where's the closest ice cream? I don't care for these chips and stuff. I just want to give me ice cream. People are like, you really like desserts, don't you? So I have a real sweet tooth, and I guess it has a lot of nostalgia for me, because when I grew up, like, the first thing I learned to cook were pancakes. And this,
I think the recipe is very close to the front of the book, in fact.
It is. And I don't know if you probably didn't cook with these, but those boxed cupcakes where you put like Disney princesses on top. So like those little stickers on top. So anyway, so those were the first things I cooked, and I cooked them for like 5 years, and they have such a nostalgic aspect for me, because that was the only way I related to my parents. It was cooking.
Yeah.
So, and desserts was a fun thing. Like, it didn't have to do with like providing for the family or like getting good grades in school. So it was just, I'm not sure. I don't know if I had to really articulate it. And you can be quite creative with it as well.
Well, and that's something that really stuck with me with your book, about how creative you've been. How much was it of trying and either succeeding or failing?
Okay, so the recipes in the cookbook have been tested at least 20 times, because it's not that I have perfectionist issues, but
I'd love to be in your circle of friends if that's what comes up at a dinner party of desserts.
I know. I do have a close group of friends, and I'm just like, just take these 40 cakes. Like, the cakes that I've made for this event, I didn't follow my recipe, so I kind of fudged up and made a fudge cake. So I literally gave them all to my friend, who has 3 growing teenage kids, so it was really handy. But what was your question again?
About trying things and seeing what happens.
Yes. So I guess I always try to make a recipe so that it uses as minimal ingredients as possible and is as easy as possible, but as delicious as possible. So it's kind of aiming for the impossible, but I don't want people to pick up a book and be overwhelmed with having to make this recipe, because I'm all up for having minimal ingredients and minimal fuss in the kitchen. I just want to create food that people would taste and be like, yes, vegan food is is not as bad as I thought. I think that's my main mission.
And how accessible is it? I mean, when you go for fewer ingredients, it obviously makes it easier. The less complex means that more people can give it a go.
Yes. One of my pet hates is having a bag of flour in the pantry and never using it, or buying it for one recipe and never using it. So I made sure that the only flours I used were like plain flour, almond meal, and like 4 different flours in the book, as opposed to some books which use like 10 flours, and I just don't have the time for that.
So are you also making the point about that sustainability piece that you touched on before, about finding things that are easy to get your hands on to make multiple things across the home?
Yes, exactly. It's all about sustainability for me, and being as minimal waste as possible.
Yeah, and that's a conversation that we're still having that seems to be growing in momentum, particularly I reckon here in Canberra. You've been here for a decade. What sort of change in that conversation have you seen?
Oh goodness, I think we're very lucky in Australia, and particularly Canberra, to be able to shop at zero waste stores and have the knowledge of minimising our plastic use. I think Canberra's quite good at that. A lot of the larger cities have some room to improve. But I also realise that some of it can be quite, you have to be relatively privileged or have a certain level of income to be able to shop at those zero waste stores, because they can be quite expensive. I personally think it's worth it. But yeah, I think there's a bit of room to go, even though we have come very far in the last 5 years.
Yeah, and I wonder why you think that this last 5 years there has been such change.
I'm not too sure why. Like, I know that a lot of the movement has started in other countries such as America. I think also veganism has increased in the last 5 years. I think it's a multitude of things, like veganism and the zero waste movement and prominent bloggers in the industry. I haven't done research on this though. I don't know what are some like archetypal causes of it. I guess seeing the world change, like seeing climate change and seeing perhaps like the bushfires earlier this year really forced people to realise that we can reduce our impact on the environment.
It challenges us to think about our vulnerabilities as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I guess like it's something that I've been aware of for quite some time, so I'm not too sure why more people know. I think any movement takes a while to garner kind of support. So I think it's just one of those movements that, I think it's just one of those movements that people are finally catching up on. But I'm not too sure why. Do you have any idea why?
I don't know. It's a question I ask a lot because I legitimately want to garner what people's views are about. Because I think it can give us a sense of perhaps where we're going and where that kind of conversation is leading us. Your book, you've touched on 2 recipes. You talked about the princess cupcakes, for lack of a better term, and the pancakes as well. What are some of your favourite things to cook, and why?
So cooking for my blog has changed cooking generally, because when I'm not cooking for my blog, I don't like to cook anymore because it wears it out of me, because I am a workaholic, so I work all the time. But from the book and just generally, anything chocolate, because I know it's going to go down a treat.
It's a crowd pleaser.
Exactly. Like my partner is the type of person who's like, I'll ask him if he likes it, and he'll be like, yeah, it's okay. But then 5 minutes later, he's gone back for 3 serves. So I'm like, okay, actions speak louder than words. So for me, anything chocolate and anything that is, this sounds really weird, but soft, like mousse or like a soft cake as opposed to like a cookie.
So let's talk about mousse. How do you make those from a plant from a plant basis?
There's different ways you can do it. So one is using tofu, which is my favorite because it is substantial.
Tofu and dessert.
Yeah, so you can do it.
Okay.
So
come on, you're gonna have to bring me along.
I did grow up on tofu, so I do see it in a different way. But if you mix silk and tofu with melted chocolate and like cocoa powder and a sweetener, it makes this like creamiest. It's like custard, but better because you don't get that weird aftertaste that you have with when eating dairy. You know that that aftertaste? Yeah. So that's one way. Or another way is, okay, so you know how you have a can of chickpeas, then you drain this like liquid out? That's called Aquafaba, which a person has realized that if it can be whipped up into like a meringue.
Really?
Yeah. So that can be mixed with melted chocolate and set to make like a fluffy mousse. So it depends what you're after.
So does it have like a gelatiny component to it?
Yeah. So that's a great egg substitute. Okay. That's a great substitute for some components of eggs in vegan cooking.
Yeah.
It cannot, I don't think it can be replaced, substituted as, exactly. Yeah. Like, eggs have many different purposes. So, but it creates a fluffiness, and that's kind of texture, helps combine the ingredients together, which is really good in vegan cooking.
When you talk about things, unusual things that you use that we might not be aware of, like the liquid from the chickpeas, what are some of the other things that you use that is second nature to you but might be a surprise to me?
Flax seeds, does that surprise you? Okay,
depends
like
what you're doing with
it. Drinking it, no. So similar to that, I need that word, that sticky, slimy texture. Okay, that probably doesn't sound very good, but that sinewy texture. So if you mix flax seeds or chia seeds with water, it creates that texture which mimics eggs and helps bind stuff in vegan baking.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's actually one of the foundational things that you use.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but at the same time, while it binds things, it can't make things rise. So instead of using eggs, I just add more baking powder because it's already in your pantry, so why not? Yeah.
Yeah. So chocolate is the crowd pleaser.
Yeah.
If you've got a friend coming over who might be a bit fussy, no, I haven't got friends like that.
Yeah.
I've culled all those out.
I know, exactly. Family members.
Well, I want to get to family in a moment. Okay. But what do you make if you're really turning it on, if you're really trying to please someone?
Well, first, I don't know if they'll be my friends. But, so I probably make the chocolate mousse tart.
Right.
Because I haven't fed that to anyone who hasn't enjoyed it. So I used to have a cake business in Canberra and used to have a store at the Living Green Festival in Canberra, which is this amazing festival, like my favourite event of the year in Canberra. And I made the chocolate mousse tart, and these people who totally didn't look like the typical vegan came up to me and they're like, "This is the best thing I've tasted, give me more, where's the recipe?" And they're like feel like they were going to strangle me for the recipe. I'm like, okay, just give me
relax.
Yeah. So that really showed me that it is a real crowd pleaser, and my partner likes it. My partner is like one of the fussiest persons who I know, so
right, well, lucky he stuck around then, or that you kept him up maybe. You touched on family.
Yeah.
Are your family vegan?
No.
So how are dinner parties when everyone gets together?
So I've probably only eaten with my family like a handful of times in the last 5 years because of the veganism makes it difficult, because they are really not traditional foodies, but they do like certain foods at their dinner table because my parents are from Hong Kong, so they have a very big emphasis on fish, which I don't like the smell for obvious reasons. So eating together can be quite difficult sometimes, but my parents do do bend over backwards to try to feed me a lot of food.
And how does what they make for you align with or challenge the orthodoxy of what you normally eat?
It's okay. I think they kind of freak out and be like, "Oh my god, what's vegan? Is flour vegan, Anthea? Can you eat bread?" I'm like, "Aren't you chefs? Shouldn't you know this?" Oh my gosh. But I think so it really challenged their paradox of food and just like, how can our daughter be vegan? But they've accepted it now. But what they feed me, I think they just freak out and just give me a big bowl of vegetables with soy sauce and like this cornflower sauce. I'm like, okay, all right, I'm working on it. But over time, they've incorporated other stuff in there, like noodles and tofu and mushrooms and stuff like that. So,
sounds like it's a bit of a journey for them as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just initially it was quite like not smooth, but I think that they're becoming used to the idea of me not eating what they want. Yeah, which is really nice.
And excuse my ignorance, but when you're sitting at the dinner table with your parents and they're eating fish, how does that make you feel?
I don't sit at the dinner table when they're eating fish.
So you won't?
No, I will. Like if we're eating together, but normally when I'm in Sydney, I try to minimise the pressure on them to provide for me because I don't want to make life hard for them. So I try to cook for myself. And I get hungry earlier in the day than they do. Like I will eat at 6, whereas they'll eat at 8 or 9.
Right. So it actually kind of works.
Yeah, it works in both of our favours.
Yeah.
I just try to make things easy for them. And I don't tell them to get things out of my face and stuff like that because it's their house and I don't want to offend them and they're doing the best that they can. So, like, at the same time, like, my partner's not vegan. So,
right, okay.
I try to be as accommodating as possible. But if something is really bothering me, I would just be like, can you open the window so I don't have to smell that?
Because you find that this smell to be quite affronting.
Yeah. I think the smell has always bothered me, even pre-vegan. So, so I just try to... I'm not really comfortable about asking for my needs sort of thing, like presenting my needs. I think that's the one thing I've always been trying to work on. So I think I just try to remove myself from the situation rather than making life hard for them. Yeah, if it really makes me uncomfortable. Yeah.
At the start, you said that there were 2 things that happened in your house. You could either cook or study. I wonder what do your parents think about the level of success that you've created through your blog, your website, your book?
I think they're quite proud of me. I don't know, like their Chinese parents express things in a different way. So whereas my father has overtly said he's proud of me, which is really nice. So the way that they express things isn't always verbally, but through actions. And like for them, they express love through food. So if I won't eat what they give me, they're like, oh my gosh, what do I do?
So it's lovely, but also challenging.
Yeah. But I think they are quite proud of me, I guess. We don't really talk about it. It's not really something that's discussed in the... They do talk about my achievements and stuff like that, but it's not in their culture to be like, we're going to sit you up on a stage and like shower you with praise.
Yeah.
They'll be like, I'm just going to like give you more food sort of thing to say that I love you. And that's how they express it.
It's kind of unspoken almost.
Yeah. Which is completely what they grew up with and what they're familiar with. So I guess if they're not familiar with another way of expression, that's fine. I've come to accept it. So yeah, it's different from growing up in Australia, whereas like I'm quite verbal. So and that's fine. So I'll tell them stuff that I think, like I'm just like, oh, you're doing a really good job and whatever. But I think they find that confrontation, or they would find that confronting, I guess.
Yeah.
So I guess it would be so difficult coming from another country with completely different mannerisms and cultural codes
different social etiquettes and everything.
Exactly. So I'm just trying to bridge the gap between their way and the Australian way, and that's something that I've always been trying to do, and they know that I struggle with sometimes, but it's all right. Yeah.
It sounds like it's one of those things of with most families, it's a bit of a work in progress, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. I do appreciate, like, if I if they still lived in Hong Kong, I would not be able to have the opportunities that I would have now. Because, Hong Kong back then was quite poor.
Yep.
Like now it's quite wealthy, but like the space that they lived in was very different from the house that they have now. Like now they have this they live in a suburb in Sydney known for its massive houses, massive streets, and they bought the house like 30 years ago. But in Hong Kong, they'd have a space like 5 times less space, and they wouldn't have their own bedroom and stuff like that. So I'm very lucky that they came to Australia. Yeah.
Well, I think we are as well, from what we've been discussing so far. And I want to talk about the trial and error, just to touch back on that. And say you're reading a magazine or a newspaper and see a recipe that looks really interesting to you. How easy do you find it to substitute, to turn it into a vegan dish?
It depends on the recipe, but I think for baking recipes, it can be particularly difficult 90% of the time to convert a recipe, because it does depend on the recipe. Like a cake with like 1 egg, for example, might be able to be converted, substituted, translated or whatever, because the egg doesn't have as much of a big component. But if a recipe has like 6 eggs, that's a different story.
So if the egg's the star, you're in trouble.
Yeah. Exactly. So I think it's better off to find a vegan recipe.
Yeah.
And I think the internet and bloggers are improving now, whereas you can usually find a vegan recipe version of most recipes out there. Yeah. Like a vegan brioche. Like the brioche is the most popular recipe on my website at the moment. And normally a brioche has like eggs and butter and stuff like that. But when I tried to convert that recipe initially, it just didn't work. It lacked that, it was too bready kind of thing. So I had to completely change it. So it's,
So what do you do for the brioche?
Okay. So I add extra fat because the eggs contribute, the eggs add fat to the bread, and more yeast to make it more fluffy, and I think that's about it. And milk is like soy milk and stuff like that, so it's pretty easy. Yeah.
One of the recipes that jumped out of me from the book was a kind of a Lamington Bowl.
That thing's very popular as
well.
That thing? yeah. I sell it at markets, and everyone's just like, whoa.
So explain that for anyone who hasn't had a look through the book yet.
Okay, so I had this raw Lamington recipe on my blog, and it takes too long to make. I don't have the time for it, and it's my recipe, so it says a lot. So it's basically like a cashew raw sponge with a whole raspberry in it, and because raspberries are easy to get rather than raspberry jam, and it's dipped in like a chocolate ganache and coated in coconut. And just like having one bite of it, you get like a mouthful of everything. So it's that's something else I would make for like a dinner guest. But some people don't like unbaked stuff, and that's completely fine. So it's one of my favorites. I really like Lamingtons. Yeah.
So I think this came out about 2 years ago. It sounds to me as though it's an evolutionary change. It keeps on growing.
Yeah.
How is the way that you see dessert? Has it changed at all since then?
Okay, so yeah, for sure, definitely. Like veganism has changed a lot, and my own style might be a perfectionist thing as well, or a creative thing. But like 5 years ago, like unbaked and raw vegan stuff was really popular, and I fell into that by accident. I guess, kind of, like, not for health reasons. A lot of people assumed that I was raw vegan. Like, no. I like my bread.
Is that another group within the veganist family?
Yeah. You can say that. But now there's even an anti-raw movement. So
you'd have to unpack that one for me.
I'm not sure. There's an anti-raw movement.
So now that's cooked. Everything has to be cooked.
Not an anti-raw movement, but I think there's a lot of antagonism against raw vegans in the vegan group, in the vegan communities, for some valid reasons and some not very valid reasons. So, like any group, there's going to be disagreements about how to approach things. So, So yeah, everyone thought I was raw vegan, but like I think in Canberra it'd be very difficult because Canberra is cold and I do not want to be eating fruit in the middle of winter, and I personally don't find it very satiating. It suits some people, but with my body I'm like, no, give me carbs, please. So yeah, so initially it was a lot about like cheesecakes and like raw vegan stuff, but now I'm just like, give me the baked cakes and the cookies and the buttery kind of stuff and just anything. Yeah.
So it just keeps on growing and changing.
Yes.
I guess that's probably where a blog fits in, isn't it? Because you're able to update in real time, whereas once the book's done and off to the publisher, even a change of thinking the next day, it might be too late.
Exactly.
For that. Although I tell you what, there's a lot of things in there that I want to be trying, but before I get onto the blog, the more contemporary stuff. I wonder if we might open up to questions now. If anyone's got a question, just want to throw your hand up. And come on, don't be shy. I've been asking a lot of questions. And we'll just get you to stand up and we'll get the microphone down to you at the front for that question. And if I can just get you to say your name at the start. Yes, please.
Hi, my name's Kim. I just wanted to know if you find that you can substitute flowers. You talked about not having too many flowers in your cupboard. So if you don't have the right flour but you've got a recipe, can you just substitute, so almond meal for normal flour, for example?
Yes, so it depends on the recipe. So with almond meal, yes, because so almond meal adds texture and moisture to a recipe, but for these recipes, you can 100% substitute it. I know because I've tried it for most of them. All I will do is add a little more oil because almond meal has the natural oils in it. And I understand that almond meal can be quite expensive, so I completely understand that.
And you did just, by extension of Kim's question, you were talking about flour before, and I think your mum said to you, is flour vegan? I meant to ask you at the time, so is it?
Yes.
Right.
Sorry. I had to pause for a while because sugar in America, some sugars in America aren't vegan because they use bone char to make it white. So, but as far as I'm concerned, it's 100% vegan in Australia, except things like cricket flour.
Right.
Which is a very new thing and kind of grosses me out. It's like grounded crickets that is in Woolies.
Jumping crickets.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I don't know why anyone would do that. Like, there's other sources of protein you can have.
Yeah, it strikes me that might not be vegan friendly.
Flour's vegan.
So any of the flours, unless it's the cricket flour, is vegan, and so you to go to that substituting. You can change them around, but I guess you've got to think about that, the oil content, the salt and sugar. Where does that play into it as well?
The only issue with substituting flours is if it's a gluten-free flour, because some gluten-free flours don't have the same elasticity as others. Right. Sugar and salt don't have a role when substituting flours.
Okay.
But you can substitute coconut sugar with normal sugar and stuff like that.
Right.
So, yeah, if that answers.
Another question? Yes, just here.
Hi, Anthea, I'm Leanne.
Hello.
I just want to ask about your workflow. So in regards to how many recipes a week, or how often you'd update your blog or your Instagram. I'd just be interested in.
Yeah, sure. Okay, Instagram's quite a beast. So if I didn't have to work on social media, I probably wouldn't, because I don't think it's very healthy for humanity to be on social media all the time. And if you know me personally, I do not want to be. Like, some people love updating their Instagram stories with their life updates, and that's just not something that I do naturally, but I have to do it for work. So Instagram, I try to do it once a day, because Instagram penalizes you if you don't. Like, your engagement drops and you might lose followers, or your following just doesn't grow, and I find that really unhealthy. So I just repost stuff if I haven't posted in a while. The blog, I'm trying to get to update twice a week. My blog's been around for 5 years, so there's a lot of recipes that I had 5 years ago that are really old and probably not something that I'd want to promote, so I'm going through a process of updating them. But I try to do one new recipe a week, at least, yeah. And it depends what else I've got going on. Honestly, I just came back from holidays. So before that, I was doing like maybe 5 recipes a week, because I wanted to continue posting during my holidays. So it really depends. Yeah. Thank you.
And by extension of Leanne's question, what sort of impact, if any, has COVID-19 had on you as a blogger and the way that you communicate about food?
I guess I've had to keep more in mind to use more affordable ingredients, which is fine because I think that all bloggers should do that anyway, because not everyone has the same privilege. And provide more substitutes for ingredients, because especially when we haven't been able to go out, to use ingredients that you already have in your pantry, and to use long life ingredients like canned fruits and things like that. So I'm very lucky to have a job where I can just work from home.
Yeah, so in that way you've been able to continue, and we know that more people than ever have been going onto blogs and spending time online. So have you, on the other side of the coin, perhaps seen an increase in traffic?
Yeah, a bit.
Has it?
Yeah, I've had to change website hosts for it, pay a
because
little
the
more money.
volume.
Yeah, so I've gotten maybe 30% more viewers to my website at least, or 50%. So before it was like I got 50,000 views a month, and now I get like 80,000 views a month, which is crazy. And more people have been online, like on social media, so I've had to be more present there. It's been weird because like I've always had an issue about working at home, and being isolated at home, but now everyone has that, so I'm like, yes, now everyone can understand what I've been going through. So but yeah, and just try to be as helpful as possible during the time, because I know a lot of people have had mental health issues, and that's also something I try to be open about on my Instagram. And
Well, it's been a big shock for most of us, isn't it? Just completely changing the way we live our lives so quickly. When you talk about that 80 or so thousand people visiting a month, do you have a sense of where they're from? Are they here in Canberra? Are they Australia? Is it overseas as well?
I haven't checked. I should probably know this. Oh,
I'm not even sure if you. I'm not even sure if you can find out that.
You can. You can. I think America's the largest. I realised that America's got 13 times the population of Australia, which is crazy. America's largest, then comes Australia, like a close second. I can't remember the percentages, but I think it was like 30% America, 25% Australia. My Instagram's a bit different, but I think that's the case for my blog. Yeah. So it's really nice to have more Australians, because I don't pronounce things with a Z and stuff like that, and the way I speak is probably very Australian. So
it's a different communication style.
It totally is. Well. Yeah.
Do we have some more questions here? Yes.
Hi, I'm Laura. I'm just wondering, like, you talked about tofu, and that's sort of something that was familiar to you from your heritage, but if there are other ways that you've brought flavours from your background and your heritage into your vegan cooking, because often I think vegan cooking can be very much sort of like, I don't know, like, for want of a better word,
That is a good question. I think initially I did, but it sounds kind of bad, but my audience didn't relate that well to it. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna ignore that. No, so like I probably use a lot of matcha in my personal cooking. I don't know, it's difficult because the way that I do cook at home is very white mainstream. So I think I have to think about this. I think most of the savoury stuff I do is kind of Asian influence, but a lot of the sweet stuff I do is more white mainstream. In saying that, I think that's also been influenced because my parents are from Hong Kong, and Hong Kong was colonized by the British for 100 years. So they've really glamorized European culture, and I think a lot of my stuff has European influences for that reason. I think Asian cooking is quite different. Yeah, I think it's come across more in my style than anything, like being quite particular about things, but not so much on the flavors. I would do more if my audience related to it more, but maybe in the future.
And when you talk about the audience not relating, is that what's driving that? Do you think is it a lack of awareness, or just that it's something that your audience isn't used to, so therefore change is hard?
Both. I think it's a lack of awareness. It's a soft point for me because I've always felt like growing up, like in ABC, Australian born Chinese in Australia, I've always had to like.
I like that description of ABC.
Yeah, I know. I had to spell out the acronym because haven't you heard of it?
Yeah.
No?
Yeah, once or twice.
Okay, all right. Okay. Yeah, so I felt like growing up, I've always had to like whitewash my Asianness, to be honest, because if I didn't, I'd be bullied in school, basically. And I don't know if you've come across this. Yeah, so I've had to, like, if I spoke another language, I'd be bullied like there's no tomorrow. One reason why I don't speak Chinese much these days, or if I wore something differently, I would be teased. And when I grew up, my area was quite white. So if you didn't assimilate, you wouldn't survive, or you wouldn't have friends, basically. So I found that was something I struggled with a lot growing up. So I think that comes across a little in my blog, and I think some companies get confused by it because they're like, okay, she's got a very Asian last name, Cheng, but she doesn't have much Asian food on her blog, and I think that confuses people. But I also think that just because someone is Asian doesn't mean that they have to like be cooking fried rice all the time.
Yeah, well, because that's just a stereotype as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you talked about
not saying that you said that. Yeah.
When you talk about some of that racism growing up, do you think, as you reflect perhaps on Australia now, that's changed?
Yeah, I think it's changed a lot. Like, I actually wish that I was a child now as opposed to, and I just hope that, like, if I ever have children, they won't experience what I did. I think it's only improving. And I think it's, like, the area where I grew up in Sydney now has, like, 10% more. I mean, 10% of people are Asian or Chinese, actually. So I think more people are becoming accepting of differences, which is great. I still think there's a long way to go.
Yeah, well, most certainly a work in progress. We're seeing that in the news almost every day, aren't we, about how we see each other, how we see ourselves, and perhaps the world around us as well. I think that's probably a perfect place for us to round out our conversation today as part of Let's Talk. Thank you so very much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me too.
Ladies and gentlemen, please get up for Anthea Cheng. And thank you very much for your company today here in COVID-19 restrictions, and for joining us wherever you are, at home, around Australia and around the world, as part of Floriade Reimagined. There's plenty more information at Floriade Australia online, where you can find out about all of these Let's Talk events, about the more than 100 sites where flowers are right around Canberra and our region, and also all of the other events, the podcast series with Lish Fayer and Adrienne Francis as well, talking about sustainability and some of those very big, complicated conversations, and I'm sure that you'll love that as well. Thank you so very much for joining us.